A reading from the Gospel according to Luke. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place." As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread.
Now, I don't know about you, but for me, it's hard to believe that just last week, as Christians have done for thousands of years, that we celebrated the resurrection. That foundation of our faith, we celebrated it with glorious music, with overflowing pews, with joy and enthusiasm, and no parking. And I think where most of us have come to take for granted this annual Easter celebration of resurrection, we must remember that 20 centuries ago, on the day that it was recorded as happening, that the scene was markedly different. In fact, there are actually 12 different stories from the Gospels which recount Jesus' appearances after his resurrection. And what these stories all have in common is at first, these Easter people, unlike us, were not very happy. In fact, what we witness is that the people to whom Jesus appeared are usually scared, or they're disbelieving, or they're distrustful, or they're just downright unsure. Some hide, some run, some clutch, some ask for evidence, and some of them out of deep disappointment that this Messiah they had hoped would come to rule Israel, out of deep disappointment, believing that he had turned out to be one darn disappointing failure, they simply threw up their hands, they slammed the door behind them, and they simply walked away. Which is what we witness in our story this morning from Luke's Gospel. Cleopas and his friend. Cleopas, isn't that a great name for a cat? Cleopas. Cleopas and his friend have simply had enough, we're told. They've thrown up their hands, they've slammed the door behind them, and they've walked away. On their way now, on this Easter afternoon, the text tells us, back to a small village called Emmaus, some 7.5 miles east of Jerusalem. But actually, hundreds of miles away from the intrigue and the innuendo and the violence and the crushing defeat of the Passover weekend in Jerusalem and the death of Jesus. Now, here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that although some modern Bibles have taken to placing a dot on the page where they suppose this town of Emmaus might have been, in truth, biblical scholars will tell you there's actually no historical evidence for a town called Emmaus' existence during the time of Jesus. Which leads one to believe that maybe that's a good thing. And why would he say that? Because it seems to invite us right into this story to recognize that each of us has our own Emmaus. Like these disciples, we all have those places of retreat that we run to when life is too much, do we not? Those places we run to when our despair is too great, when the price of living seems more than it is worth. Yes, I would suggest that we all have places like this. Places we believe we can run to when things get too much to simply get away from all of our problems. Which means we can all identify with Cleopas and his friend on this road to Emmaus. These two who are disappointed, these two who are discouraged about the events in their life. They just want to get on the move. They just want to get out of town. And which one of us hasn't attempted to do just that? I mean, think about it. A relationship lets you down, a career disappoints you, and you head off to Emmaus. We find that the fulfillment we wanted, or the compensation we'd hoped for, or the reward or the excitement we dreamed of, it doesn't materialize, and we want to head off to Emmaus. It happens to every single one of us, doesn't it? We all know Emmaus, because when things don't go right, we are ready to throw up our hands and walk away. Wander off east of Easter, thinking that that will take us away from the problem. But you see, there's one truth about Emmaus, and it is this. It is that sometimes taking a trip to this mythical place can be enough to help us take a whole new perspective on the problems that have driven us there in the first place. And that is precisely what happened to Cleopas and his friend in our story from Luke today. For as they walked that road to Emmaus, the gospel tells us, they encountered the risen Christ. And that encounter changed their lives forever. Because encounters with the risen Christ always does that to you, you see. And where we may have only 12 biblical testimonies of encounters with the risen Christ in that day, the truth is, the reason we even bother to gather here week after week, the reason we bother to celebrate Easter at all, in fact, is that encounters with the Spirit of the resurrected Christ can happen in every single one of our lives over and over and over again. And sometimes you have to be in that kind of desperate, east of Easter position, like these disciples, trying to get away from it all before you recognize His resurrected Spirit. Recognize that it is right by your side, has been there all along, and you just never, ever noticed it. George Legge had such a recognition. George was standing on a bridge spanning the River Seine in Paris. He was prepared to jump and to take his life when a priest was called by the officials to attempt to talk him down. George Legge, you see, had just been released from a French prison after serving 20 years. He felt his life was over and done. He felt he had no future, no dignity, no self-respect. Why not end it all by simply jumping into the river? Why no one, George thought, would even care. The priest who was called to attempt to talk him down was named Father Pierre. He was a small little man with a giant, giant heart. Well, Father Pierre, after introducing himself, climbed up next to George on the railing of the bridge, and he said, "My son, I've done bad things too. In fact, I've built homes in my garden without building permission. I've used material that I've bought on credit, and I have nothing left to pay for them. My son, I can't give you anything, but since you want to die, You're completely free to do so. But before you choose to kill yourself, would you mind coming and giving me a hand to help the homeless I'm attempting to build these houses for? And then after we're finished, you can climb back up here and you can jump. Well, an amazing thing happened. George's face changed. Tears came to his eyes. He came down, and in time, his life changed too. For together the two, George Legge and little Father Pierre, began a ministry that today shelters over 19,000 people every year across France. And you know what they call that ministry? They call it Emmaus. The place, their mission statement states, where all, despite their troubles and turmoil, can meet the risen Christ. Yes, like Father Pierre and George Legge, an encounter with the resurrected Christ can come in the most unexpected ways. And the other strange thing is that it can come through the most unpretentious and unpromising people. For God is thrifty, you see. So nothing in God's world ever goes to waste. Meaning that Christ's life-restoring Spirit is just liable to pop out of anybody anytime when you need it most. You just never, ever know. Tom Traeger recalls a time when he was going to be away from his fiancée for 3 long summer months. He was going back to school. He was taking a bus from Ithaca, New York to New Haven, Connecticut. And the bus stopped at a Greyhound bus station, and this station left a lot to be desired. It was dirty. It was old. It lacked proper circulation. Still, Traeger decided to sit down at one of those counter stools, and he found himself directly across from this very old woman. She was a little disheveled. She was not very well dressed. She had dirt under her fingernails, and her hair had not been brushed in a while. Much to his dismay, this woman insisting on starting a conversation with him. You ever been in a place like that? And this woman said, "You know, honey, you sure look depressed." Traeger said, "I am." And he said, "I don't know what came over me, but then I started to cry." And this woman, she tried to reach across the table and pat my cheek, he said, and I pulled back. "Well, tell me what's wrong then, honey." And Traeger then said he found himself telling this stranger about his fiancée, about how much he missed her. He even showed her a picture of her from his wallet. And this old disheveled woman said, "I've never seen such a beautiful woman." And then she told him all about her own marriage. She said marriage was wonderful and that he was going to have a wonderful one too because everything will be just fine. And then she said, "You know, honey, I think you might feel better if you had some food with that coffee." So she ordered the last stale donut from under the glass on the counter. You ever seen those? She broke it in half. And with her dirty fingers, she looked at Traeger and she said, "Here, eat this." Just then, an announcement came, and the woman said, "Well, that's my bus, I have to go," and she scurried away. Traeger concludes his story by saying this: "As she left carrying her paper bags of clothes, my eyes were opened, and I recognized that Christ had been sitting right there with me in that bus station, sharing a stale donut and a word of assurance for my deeply saddened heart." That's how it happens, you see. But the Emmaus promise from Luke is that resurrection is not just once and for all. It is then and forever. For Christ rises up in our own hearts in endless, novel, and new ways, coming to us in events and people, in dreams and hopes. And when he does, resurrection happens over and over and over again. For the Emmaus promise is that those who are searching will find answers, that those who are lost will be found, that those who are broken will find healing, that those who are drifting will find an anchor, that those who are groundless will find a rock on which to stand. And all these hopes, all these promises, all these assurances come to those who take the time to recognize, as Cleopas and his friend did, the risen Messiah in their midst. So let me ask, how good are you at recognizing Christ in your midst? Think about it. In those times of struggle, is that your first impulse to look for Christ for support and help? I mean, how might your life change if you made it a consistent goal to look for Christ when you were in need? I've told you on more than one occasion, one of the most profound and moving, instructive stories I've ever heard from Scott Peck's book, The Different Drum. It's about a monastery that had fallen on very hard times. It was once a thriving community of monks. Now there are only 5 left, and all of them were quite elderly. So they all wondered what could be done to revive this once great monastery before they died. Well, living alone, after years of silent prayer and contemplation, the old monks had become a bit psychic. You know what I mean by that? It's kind of like when you've been married a long time, you know what he's going to say before he says it, and you know he's wrong. These monks had become a bit psychic, so they could sense when anyone was in the woods outside the monastery. And it just so happened that the local rabbi had this cabin nearby, and he came to the woods from time to time. And one evening, the monks said quietly to one another, "I think the rabbi's in the woods." Yes, the rabbi is in the woods. And as they agonized over the imminent death of the monastery, it occurred to the monks that one of them maybe should ask the abbot to go, and maybe he could visit the rabbi and ask if the rabbi would have any advice for the monastery. Should they simply disband now? Should they close their doors? What should they do? So the rabbi went and he visited. So the abbot went and he visited with the rabbi in the hut. But the rabbi could only commiserate with the abbot. "Oh, I know how it is," the rabbi said. "The spirit has gone out of the people. Almost no one comes to the synagogue these days anymore either." So the old abbot and the old rabbi, they read the Torah, and then they read the Gospels, and they spoke of deep things. After a while, they embraced, and the abbot prepared to leave. But before leaving, the abbot said, "Oh, Rabbi, I failed in my purpose for coming. Is there no advice you can give me on how to save our monastery?" "No," said the rabbi. "The only thing I can tell you is that the Messiah is one of you." Well, when the abbot returned to the monastery, his fellow monks gathered around him, asking if the rabbi was any help. "No," said the abbot. "In fact, all we did was weep and read together. But as I was leaving, he did say something strange. He said the Messiah is one of us." Well, in the days and weeks that followed, the old monks pondered these words. The Messiah is one of us. The Messiah is one of us, they thought to themselves. One of us at the monastery? I mean, who would that be? Do you suppose he meant the abbot? Or then again, Brother Thomas. He's a very holy man. Surely he could not have meant Brother Elrod. Elrod gets crotchety. Although, when you look back on it, Elrod usually shows up at the right time. Certainly the rabbi didn't mean Brother Philip. He's a passive nobody. But you know, he does have a gift of being there when you need him, and maybe the Messiah is in him. And a strange thing happened. As they contemplated in this manner, things begin to change. The old monks began to treat one another with extraordinary respect on the off chance that one of them might be the Messiah. And so it happened, that people who were still drawn to the monastery grounds because of its beauty, well, they began to become conscious of the aura of extraordinary respect and love that now these old monks seemed to share in that place. It radiated in them, you see. It was attractive, it was compelling, and soon these folks came back more frequently, and they brought their friends to show them this special place. And soon their friends brought their friends, and soon one of them joined the monastery, and then another, and after a few years, the monastery was once again a thriving order, all because of the rabbi's gift. And the rabbi's gift, you see, the rabbi's gift is one available at any moment to any one of us. The rabbi's gift is the invitation to see the Spirit of the resurrected Christ alive and well in the hearts of those around us. We can spot it when things get too tough and we're ready to get away and walk away or jump from a bridge. We can spot it when we're despairing and alone and someone shares something simple with us like a broken donut or broken bread or their broken heart or just words of hope that heal. But for the Spirit of the resurrected Christ, it revives and renews us again and again and again and again. Like Cleopas and his friend, our eyes are open and we can see. So my word to you on this first Sunday after Easter is this. Let us be of good cheer, my friend. For this Emmaus story says that despite whatever sadness we carry, despite whatever confusion we might have, the risen Christ is here, walking along with us. And all we have to do is notice it. Because the recognition of the risen Christ in our midst will change our outlook on everything. In the name of God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the people said, Amen.